On one of New York's crowded streets, the flow of life stopped for a moment. There were the brakes of a speeding car, the shouts of people, followed by the scream of a child. A little girl stepped into the road, not even realizing how close the danger was. But at that moment, a man reflexively stepped forward. Time slowed to a crawl, and he pulled her into his arms and swung her to the side of the road. The car passed, almost touching her feet. The little girl was shaking, her breathing ragged as tears rolled down her cheeks. The man knelt down, trying to reassure her. "Okay," he said in a gentle voice. "You are safe now." A woman appeared next to her. Her thin features sharpened with fatigue, her eyes filled with both fear and relief. She hugged her daughter as she fell into his arms and turned to him to thank him. "You. Without you. Thank you, really." The man's name was Alexander. She did not know who he was at that moment. Only his confident posture and kind eyes stood out. Looking at her devastated appearance and her frail form, Alexander made a decision. "We should take her to the hospital," he said. She was about to protest, but she could not resist his determination. During the initial examinations at the hospital, Alexander had the opportunity to examine the woman and her daughter more closely. The little girl's name was Emily, and her mother was Grace. Apparently, they were both homeless. Grace tried not to say too much, but Alexander understood their situation. When it became clear that the girl needed to be monitored not only because of the accident but also for her general health, Alexander spoke to the doctor and offered to cover the costs. Grace was surprised. "You don't have to do that," she murmured shyly. "No one should be forced to do this," Alexander said with a smile. "But if I can help someone, I will." Alexander talked to Grace and Emily for several hours. He wondered what had happened to this woman and child and tried to understand their life story. Grace proudly refrained from talking about her past, but nothing escaped Alexander's eyes. He felt sorry for Grace as Emily's treatment continued. He wanted to give them a chance to get their lives back on track, not just medically. But there would be a price. A few days later, Alexander made Grace an offer. "Grace," he said, looking at her sincerely, "my ex-wife is getting married in a few weeks. I have to go to this wedding, but I don't want to go alone. If I have someone with me, it will be easier." Grace looked at him in surprise. "But why me? I mean, isn't that rather strange?" Alexander smiled slightly. "It may be strange, but the more I got to know you, the more I realized you were different. If you agree, I'll arrange a home for you and Emily, and the treatment is entirely on me." Grace paused for a moment. This offer was too generous, but the sincerity in Alexander's gaze had won her trust. "All right," she finally said, "but I only accept this for Emily." Alexander felt that everything had to be perfect for the wedding. He took Grace to a fashion house and bought her an elegant dress, then to the hairdresser. Grace's eyes widened when she saw her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was styled with professional skill, her facial features revealed with grace. She almost didn't recognize herself. Alexander's gaze said more than anything else. He said to her, "You've always carried this. You just needed to remember it a little." Grace blushed. The bond between them was deepening with each passing moment. On the day of the wedding, when Grace stepped into the hall, everyone's gaze turned to her. Alexander was happier than ever. But the story didn't end there. Grace saw the scars from Alexander's past life. Alexander saw the pain from Grace's past. The two learned to heal each other's wounds, despite all the baggage from the past. The story showed that love and second chances are not only in fairy tales. Sometimes, at the right time, in the right place, people could meet someone who would change their lives forever. When Grace entered the wedding hall next to Alexander, everyone's eyes turned to her. These looks, somewhere between amazement and admiration, both disturbed and redefined Grace. A few days before, she had been a woman fighting for Emily on the streets, and now, in the most impressive venue in the city, she shone in a glittering dress and a confident presence. The first thought of those who saw her was that Grace was part of this society world. But this was not true for her, nor for Alexander. Grace was the most real thing in this shiny world. Alexander could not control his expression as he looked at her out of the corner of his eye. Her grace came not only from her outward appearance, but from the depth of her inner being. When Grace spoke, her voice was calm and warm, despite the burdens life had placed on her. People sensed her sincerity and turned towards her as if mesmerized. Alexander, on the other hand, could not take his eyes off her even for a moment. It was not only her beauty that impressed him so much, but also the strong spirit that had survived despite the hardships she had endured. At the other end of the hall, Alexander's ex-wife Caroline was completely distracted. Even when she should have been at the center of her own wedding, her eyes kept drifting to Grace and Alexander. Grace's elegance seemed to overshadow her own carefully planned and lavish wedding. Everyone was talking about Grace. Who is she? How elegant, but I don't recognize her. These words reached Caroline's ears. Caroline felt a kind of jealousy towards Grace, but it was no ordinary jealousy. Grace's elegance was much more real than the false lights of Caroline's society life. This shocked him even more. After the wedding, when Alexander asked Grace, "Shall we get away from the crowd a little longer?" Grace hesitated. She had been in such an impressive environment that getting out would feel like a relief. Alexander smiled, recognizing her hesitation. "It's just a meal. I promise it won't be complicated for you or me." Grace reluctantly agreed. A few minutes later, they found themselves in a simple but elegant restaurant in a quiet corner of the city. Alexander began to speak with his usual confidence, but this time his voice was a little softer, a little more sincere. "Grace," he said, "thank you for tonight, for what you have brought to me and to this evening. But I don't think thank you is enough." Grace bowed her head, smiled shyly, and replied, "It's a big enough thing for you to do this for Emily for me. But I still don't understand why you're doing this." Alexander leaned forward slightly. "I didn't know why at first either," he said. "But now it's clear. Grace, you are. You're not just a mother fighting for Emily. You are a person who carries all the beautiful things this world has forgotten." Grace's face flushed even redder. I'm just trying to do the best I can," she said. But the intensity she saw in Alexander's eyes prevented her from saying more. For Grace, these words carried both happiness and a kind of fear. 2 days ago, she was still sleeping on the street, wondering what to eat, and now she was being admired by one of the most powerful men in the city. She felt that this world was not real. Everything was moving too fast. Alexander seemed to realize this. "Grace," he said, breaking the silence, "I don't want to show you how I feel until I have earned your trust. But know this. Everything is real. That I helped you and Emily, that we're sitting here right now. Please, give yourself time to think about everything. But whatever you feel about me, remember this. Everything means more with you." Grace stared at the table. Her heart was beating fast. But the sincerity of Alexander's words made her feel safe for the first time in this new world. Maybe, just maybe, she could believe him. The morning after the wedding, Grace agreed to stay in the apartment Alexander had offered her. It would be a temporary solution, at least until Emily had recovered and recovered. As much as Grace was wary of the comfortable life that was being offered to her, she accepted the decision with Emily's peace of mind in mind. They moved into a warm and simple apartment in a quiet neighborhood close to the city center. Emily loved the new home immediately. Grace was adapting more and more every day, trying to erase the traces of her years on the streets. But she did not want to feel completely indebted to Alexander in this new life. After a while, she found a job at a local cafe. In the mornings, she left Emily at home and went to work, returning in the evening to find her daughter's cheerful face. Emily was not uncomfortable being home alone. On the contrary, this new order brought her a sense of peace. She played with the toys Grace had left in the kitchen, flipped through books, and enjoyed a new world. During this time, Alexander often came to visit them. Every time he came, he brought small gifts for Emily and engaged in long conversations with Grace over coffee in the kitchen. But he always kept his distance. He was careful not to do anything that would undermine Grace's trust, giving her space to set her own boundaries. At first, Grace saw this kind and understanding man only as a savior. But over time, she realized what a deep and honest person Alexander was. She realized that he was there not just to help, but because they really cared. And this touched Grace. Nevertheless, his sense of gratitude made him suppress his feelings. The more Alexander observed Grace's efforts to stand on her own 2 feet, the more he admired her. Grace had quickly become a respected figure in the cafe where she worked, even paying for the apartment with the money she earned. Alexander could not hide his surprise when he learned about this. Grace had paid the rent and bills without even telling him. One day, he decided to talk about it. "Grace," he said over coffee in the kitchen, "why did you do this? I mean, you knew I was supportive." Grace paused for a moment. She looked up from her coffee cup and looked at Alexander. "I'm grateful," she said in a calm but determined voice. "But I need to stand on my own 2 feet. I don't want to be indebted to you and Emily. That's important to me." For a moment, Alexander could not respond to her words. This woman was not only strong, but proud. For Alexander, Grace's strength, goodwill, and independence made her even more fascinating. Over time, the bond between Grace and Alexander grew deeper. With every meeting, every conversation, the invisible bond between them grew stronger. Alexander found it increasingly difficult to suppress his feelings for Grace. But he was always cautious, afraid of hurting Grace or losing her trust. One evening, Alexander invited Grace and Emily to dinner. They met at the cafe after closing. During the meal, while Emily was merrily circling the table, there was a silence between Grace and Alexander. It was not an uncomfortable silence. On the contrary, they could both understand each other's thoughts without speaking. Alexander finally took a deep breath and turned to Grace. "Grace," he said, his voice shaky but determined. "I need to tell you something." Grace's heart skipped a beat when she saw the look on his face. "What is it, Alexander?" she asked softly. Alexander took Grace's hands gently in his. "I have to admit that I'm not here just to help you," he said. "Every day I spent with you, every conversation we had, made me realize how special you are. Grace, I feel something for you, something so deep, so real." Grace's eyes widened. In her heart, she knew she had feelings for Alexander, but she had not expected such an open confession. In that moment, she was torn between fear and happiness. "Alexander, she said, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Alexander noticed her hesitation and smiled. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I just want you to know how I feel. Your trust is the most important thing to me." Grace took a deep breath. "I have feelings for you too," she finally whispered. But it all happened so fast. "I'm scared." Alexander held her hand tighter. "Together we can overcome this fear," he said. "Just trust me, Grace." That night, the distance between them disappeared. They both realized that life had offered them this second chance. And they were determined to heal each other's wounds. Love could come knocking at the most unexpected moments, as long as they had the courage to open the door. The next morning, Grace woke up to the soft light streaming through the window. For the first time in a long while, she felt peaceful and safe. For the first time in her life, someone saw her not as a burden, but as a person who mattered. The sound of Emily's laughter broke the morning stillness. Grace got up quietly and opened the door, finding Alexander sitting on the floor playing with Emily and her dolls. Emily burst into giggles.
"No, Alex.
"That's not how dolls have tea," she exclaimed. Watching them, Grace's eyes filled with tears. Seeing how much Alexander cared, not just for her but for Emily too, filled her heart with indescribable warmth. She could feel that today was going to be special. Alexander looked up and smiled when he saw her. "You're awake," he said warmly. "How about breakfast?" "Emily's idea," he added with a wink. Grace, feeling a little shy, nodded. "Sure, why not?" she said, trying to hide her excitement. This was their first day as a couple, and she wasn't quite sure what to expect. At breakfast, Alexander was his usual confident self, but he was especially gentle with Grace. Emily happily chattered away as Alexander occasionally glanced at Grace with a soft, sincere smile. Though Grace felt slightly nervous, she found herself relaxing more and more in his presence. Every word, every gesture from Alexander slowly built her trust in him. After breakfast, they strolled through the city. Alexander hesitated before taking Grace's hand, but eventually gathered the courage to do so. Grace was startled at first, but then let herself lean into the warmth of the gesture. Alexander stopped and turned to her, his gaze filled with admiration. "Your strength amazes me every day," he said. "But you should know, you don't always have to stand alone. You're not alone anymore." A faint smile spread across Grace's face. "I think it's going to take me a little time to get used to that," she said. But the gratitude in her eyes spoke volumes, far more than her words ever could. A while later, Alexander suggested that Grace and Emily move into his home. At first, the idea made Grace uneasy. She was so used to standing on her own 2 feet that the thought of being so close to someone else felt overwhelming. But Alexander patiently and kindly addressed her concerns. "This isn't about dependence, Grace," he said one evening as they sat together. "I know how strong you are, and that's one of the many reasons I admire you. But choosing to be together means choosing to support each other. I truly believe we can create a better life for Emily and for you." Grace sat quietly, her emotions swirling, before finally nodding. "I guess it's time to take that step," she said softly. And so, Grace and Emily moved into Alexander's warm and welcoming home. For Emily, the move was an adventure. She quickly settled into her new room, surrounded by new toys and secure in the knowledge that she was safe. Grace, over time, began to see this new arrangement not just as a helping hand, but as the foundation of a real family. Emily's enrollment in one of the city's best schools marked another milestone for Grace. On her first day, Emily was a little shy but quickly embraced by her teachers and classmates. Grace, standing in the schoolyard as she watched Emily walk into her new classroom, felt tears stream down her cheeks. "I never thought this would be possible," she whispered to Alexander. Alexander took her hand and replied, "I'm here to make those dreams a reality. You know everything's going to get better now, don't you?" Grace wiped her tears and nodded. "Yes,
I do," she said.
For the first time, she felt a genuine sense of hope for the future. As the days passed, Alexander felt the urge to show Grace the depth of his love once more. One evening, he invited her to an elegant restaurant. The atmosphere was intimate, lit by the soft glow of candlelight. Alexander's excitement and nervousness were evident in his eyes. Finally, he took out a ring and held Grace's hands. "Grace," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Nothing in my life has meant more to me than meeting you and Emily. Will you give me the honor of spending the rest of my life with you? Will you marry me?" Grace felt her breath catch. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and her heart raced. "Yes," she whispered. That single word wasn't just an answer. It was a farewell to her painful past and a warm embrace of her bright future. As wedding plans unfolded, Grace requested a simple ceremony. Alexander respected her wishes, but ensured every detail was flawless. On the wedding day, Grace felt an overwhelming sense of peace and joy she hadn't experienced in years. Walking down the aisle in her white dress, hand in hand with Emily, she felt the weight of her past hardships lift. Each step was a celebration of her resilience and strength. As Alexander watched her approach, his eyes shone with love and gratitude. "Being with you," he whispered when she reached him, "is the best decision I've ever made." Grace smiled, her heart full. "For the first time, I feel complete with you," she replied softly. The wedding was filled with laughter and joy. Emily carried the bridal bouquet, her giggles lighting up the room. Friends and family surrounded them with love and support, solidifying their bond as not just a couple but a family. Later that night, Grace and Alexander stood alone on the terrace under the stars. Alexander wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Everything's going to be so much better now," he said quietly. Grace rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. "We're not alone anymore," she whispered. "We're a family now." And with that, they began their journey together, leaving behind the shadows of the past. With love and trust as their foundation, they stepped into a future filled with endless happiness. This story shows that even in the darkest moments of life, it's possible to find hope. Despite carrying the scars of her past, Grace found a new beginning through her own strength and Alexander's compassion. Emily's laughter no longer belonged to a mother fighting to survive, but to a woman who had built a loving family. The life Alexander and Grace created together, healing each other along the way, proved that love and second chances aren't just found in fairy tales. Sometimes, meeting the right person at the right time can create a miracle that heals all wounds.